So for today's note, solving right triangles, you want the orange page that has the three flaps. You're going to title the page Solving Right Triangles, page 5. And then you'll have your three flaps. The top one is called Find a Side Using the Pythagorean Theorem. The middle one is called Finding a Side Using Trig. And the bottom one is called Find a Side, an Angle Using Trig. On the side of the page, I wrote a really big reminder, calculator in degree mode. Next up is the first flap. You're going to open that up, and on the left-hand side, when it's open, you're going to write, find the missing side of a right triangle with a hypotenuse of 14 and a leg of 11. So I think when you have a problem like this, the easiest thing to do is draw a picture. And so what matters is that the hypotenuse is across from the right angle, and it's the 14. Then, because it's the Pythagorean theorem, we know that it's leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So I wrote it as x squared plus 11 squared is 14 squared. And then I just multiplied out the 11 squared and the 14 squared. And then in my next step, I did subtract 121 from both sides. And I got x squared is 75. So I need to take the square root of both sides, but we want an exact answer, which means no decimals. So I broke down the 75 into 25 and 3. And then I know that the square root of 25 is 5. I showed that by breaking it down into 5 and 5. So the 5 gets out of the radical and the 3 stays underneath, so my final answer is 5 root 3. Now you're going to open up the second flap, and that one's going to be find the missing side. And then here is the picture that you'll use. The angle in the bottom right is 32 degrees, and my two sides are x and 13. So I want to think about what the sides are compared to the angle. So x is opposite of 32, and 13 is adjacent, so I labeled them O and A, which helped me realize that I was working with tangent. So I wrote the equation tangent 32 equals x over 13, or opposite over adjacent. Then I multiply both sides by 13, and I type into my calculator 13 times tangent 32, and I got 8.1. Here's the picture for the second side on the right. So this is still in the middle flap, and the picture has a 16 in the upper right hand corner. Compared to the 16, the 12 is the adjacent side, so I labeled it A, and the x is the hypotenuse, so I labeled it with the h. A and h mean I'm working with cosine. And so I'm using cosine of 16 equals 12 over x. Now, there's two ways you can do this. One is to show all of the work, where I multiply both sides by x, and I'm left with x cosine 16 equals 12, and then I divide both sides by cosine 16. Or, whenever the variable's in the bottom like this, I can just switch out the x and the cosine 16. So you'll see my next step, I wrote it as x equals 12 over cosine 16. Those two just flip positions. The cosine stays with the 16 though. And then I type into the calculator 12 divided by cosine 16 and hit enter, and I get 12.5. Lastly is the third flap, which is find the missing angle. So here's my picture for this. My theta is my missing angle. And when I look at this picture, I realize that 4 is opposite of theta and 5 is my hypotenuse. So I go ahead and label O and H, which is sine. So sine of theta equals 4 over 5. Now, in order to solve angles, you need to use what's called the inverse. On the calculator, it's second sine or second cosine or second tangent. You're hitting that second button in the upper left-hand corner. Mathematically, it's -1. So I wrote it as theta equals sine inverse of 4 over 5. I typed that into the calculator, second sine, 4 divided by 5, and that's where I got my answer, 53.1. So a nice reminder in the middle of these two problems is going to be that you use inverse to find angles. Always. You have to use inverse when you're working with angles. Here's the next picture. We have the 11, which is opposite of theta, and 23, which is adjacent. And so opposite and adjacent tell me I'm working with tangent. So I have tan theta equals 11 over 23. And then again, I'll do the inverse of tangent equals 11 over 23. So second tan, 11 divided by 23, and I get 25.6. That's the end of the notes.